Okay, next we're going to have Bill Liles, who will be talking about EclipseMob initial planning for 2024. So Bill Liles, NQ6Z, go ahead.
Okay. Greetings. Thanks, Nathan. So I'm going to discuss the EclipseMob and what we did back in 2017 and what we're trying to do for 2024. So I'll go through some historical collection efforts, then the 2017 effort, what was planned for 2024. We have a new receiver in 2024, so I'll go over that and then some conclusions. So the previous speaker already talked about why we want to collect during total solar eclipse for RF propagation. But basically, it's a much better conditions than going through the gradual change from night to day or day to night. It's far more abrupt and therefore more variables are controllable. So historically, people have been doing this for a long time. The first one was in 1912 by William Eccles, who some of you may recall was the co-inventor of the flip-flop. In 1912, there wasn't a lot of transmitters, so he didn't even have one to listen to. So what he reported was clicks and scratching sounds. He did get his analysis published in Nature magazine, however, but we couldn't compare it to anything else. So as that eclipse moved eastward, folks in other countries were listening to the transmitter that was on the Eiffel Tower. And they didn't know that each other was going to be doing this, so they were not coordinated, the collections weren't compatible, but yet, since they all got published, people started realizing, hey, we can do this over a spatial diverse area. So the next collection was planned for 1914, but World War I kind of prevented that from happening. So in 1919, they tried to do it with transmitters down Panama Canal and Cairo with receivers located in multiple countries, but the results were kind of mixed. Some folks said, hey, the signal strength is less during the eclipse. Some folks said the signal strength is greater during the eclipse. But because of the different ways of collection, they weren't actually able to compare this and figure out why those different reports. So there's another eclipse over the United States coming up in 1925. And for a year in advance of that, every month, the Scientific American magazine published a short notice saying, hey, folks, this eclipse is coming. We'd like you to listen to AM radio stations and fill out this form, send it in to us. And they got over 2,000 forms. And I think at that time, that's great because that's the early days of broadcast AM radio in the United States. But even though the spaces on the forms for giving date, location, time, and which AM station they were reporting on, lots of times that information was missing. So analysis could never be done. The ARRL was working with Scientific American, but instead of listening to AM stations of commercial type, they were going to be listening to other hams. And out of the 150 reports, the ARRL said, we only got 50 reports that were usable because, again, lots of data was missing, which is really too bad. So what have we learned from this? Well, you better have similar reporting standards. So Appleton and Chapman decided to do that for the eclipses of 1932, 33, and 34 to organize folks all around the world to collect during those three solar eclipses. And they published a report in 1935, and guess what the conclusion was? Hey, we should have probably agreed upon what sort of standards and of reporting and how these collections should happen prior to the eclipse occurring, because they didn't do that. And so they had data from lots of different places, and lots of people got articles published, but they were all standalone. Well, we're trying to do this over a spatial extent. So today, with inexpensive hardware and GPS receivers, that's possible. We don't have to worry about people filling in location, date, and time data because we would be taking that all from GPS. So what is the EclipseMob project? It's about people across North America building and testing receivers. And if you look in the upper right, there is an example of the receiver that folks built. We sent them a kit. It had the porta board, it had all those components on it, wire, even wire strippers, so they could put together the kit. And they would listen to WWVB at 60 kilohertz and then collect it before, during, and after the solar eclipse, upload the data, because we're trying to understand certain things about the D layer, and so we want to be down beneath HF. So what was the receiver? Well, basically we were using a smartphone as a software-defined radio. So we had an antenna, an amplifier, and then remember this is at 60 kilohertz. Smartphone A to D converter only wants signals into it to depend upon the phone to 20 kilohertz, 22 kilohertz, or that. Though when I started this project, we found smartphones that would take in the 60 kilohertz raw. So we have to mix down 60 kilohertz into the audio bandwidth. So you needed a mixer. Well, where am I going to get a local oscillator from for that mixer? Well, the smartphone put out on its headphone jack a frequency that went into another chip that acts as a frequency doubler that went into the mixer to get the tone. So that was the 2017 receiver. We relied upon a smartphone, but notice there's very few components otherwise. And we collected it across the United States and 3 foreign countries, but we kind of didn't do some things as well as we should have. For example, this project was run out of George Mason University and University of Massachusetts at Boston, the 2 yellow dots on that map. And you can see where most of the receivers were located. We have to do a better job of distributing them around the country. But we had over 150. We supplied 150 kits to folks to build, but we put up on our website the parts list and instructions for those kits. And so folks went off and bought the parts on their own, built kits. People who had never built anything in their life. We used to get photographs from folks showing what they had built and says, can you debug this just by looking at the photograph? It's great. Lots of people contributed to this, and we had educational material and webinars for teachers in which they got continuing education credit for attending, is well received. So what did we learn? Okay, folks are interested. Folks would do things. That's great. Citizen science is a great thing. We started with less than a year before the solar eclipse. So people were building those receivers before the software was written for the smartphone. So they couldn't test out the receivers. That's not good. Also, I got to really say hats off to the 2 people who handled all the social media and websites for us. They were great, but they were students who also needed to graduate. And this job really requires dedicated full-time people. It was amazing how active those different social media sources were. I had not predicted that at all. So we're trying to figure out about doing a train-the-trainer model to reach out to handle more people, because the few of us at George Mason, UMass Boston, and myself aren't able to do that. The receiver system had a flaw in it, in that on smartphones, if you plug in a plug for external mic and speakers, that doesn't mean that the smartphone, in fact, enables the external mic. And so I have lots of recordings of people talking to oohs and ahs as they saw the eclipse, because the internal mic was still enabled and the external one wasn't, which is where our signals were coming in at. So I don't really have anything to report from it. But we want to scale this up from 150, 200 receivers to thousands. So in 2024, as you know, there's another solar eclipse coming. So we're going to do this again, but this time we want to have 1,000 spatially diverse collectors. We're upgrading the equipment. We're no longer going to use a smartphone. We're going to use Raspberry Pi and GPS receivers. We're going to also just not be focused around 60 kilohertz WWVB and the Navy station, which is nearby, and try to collect all the signals up to and including 60 kilohertz. We have some discussions about collecting the new ham band at 136 kilohertz and haven't just decided on that yet. And we're going to go to the train-to-trainer approach, as I mentioned earlier. So There's a leadership team, which is still the George Mason University and UMass Boston and myself. We will have web resources. We'll network with local leaders, such as museums, libraries, etc. Fan it out, but also we can have people build their own if they want to. They don't have to go through an organization. So we're changing the receiver. Smartphones today are coming out without microphone and headphone jacks, so there's nothing for me to plug into. GPS subsystems and single board computers are easily available at low cost. I can do large storage of the SD card, so I can record all those signals up through and including WWV to study other Navy transmitters and other transmitters down at those frequencies. So here's what the receiver is going to look like. Get an instrumentation amplifier on the front end. See a Raspberry Pi controls everything with a local GPS and SD card, and then just take that SD card later to upload it to the internet and our file servers. Here's the antenna. This is the same antenna as we used last time. That's a couple hundred turns of enameled wire. It was interesting in that we had all that saying, kids would never do this. We had kids 8 years old busy winding those antennas. It was fun to watch. And this looks really good. It's based upon design from the Society of Amateur Radio Astronomers and works very well. So what are we doing? We're starting much earlier. Like this talk isn't advanced of 2024, right? We would demonstrate a working receiver with software this year. It's almost done, so we should have that out shortly. Plan to hire professionals for some tasks instead of students. And we're planning to leverage local leaders. So I want to acknowledge the folks who helped us on the last go-around. John Walkway, he helped us with that NRTF transmitter outside Sacramento, California. That's great for him to do. Other people did collect that signal. We unfortunately did not, but that was a great transmitter to have on. George LeMaster, he did everything. He did things before we knew that there were going to be problems. He was just fantastic, and so got to give him a lot of thanks. And none of this would have happened without the National Science Foundation. They paid for the students that handled the social media. They paid for all those kits that went out. They were just really good to us. So thank you very much. Now, you folks like to join us in the next one. Remember, you can operate at the same time because this is just a passive collector that's sitting there. So you can still take part in the Eclipse QSO party. So email us. There's a form at that site you can fill out that says you're interested in this. If you know other people that are interested, people in libraries and museums of that you think would like to organize, please let us know. Thank you very much. Any questions?
So we had a couple questions actually, and one I already answered. So Bill is only discussing 2024. The question was, do you have the opportunity to use the 2020 Chile-Argentina eclipse as a smaller trial run?
I'm sorry, I still don't hear anybody.
And the answer to that is we talked about that. We plan to do that, and also the one that went in 2019, but we were still testing the system. And so we're not able to take advantage of those two eclipses.
Christina, do you want to talk at all about things you have planned and that we have planned?
Well, we're going to be very well positioned because Totality will be going right overhead here in Cleveland. And so we are planning on being the sort of the center point of some of these activities and setting up stations along and around the path of totality for that purpose. David, anything in particular?
Well, yeah, that and the University of Southern Illinois at Carbondale Club was right at the center of totality for the 2017 eclipse. And that's where the two paths are going to cross. So we ought to work out something good to do with them. And Christina, you're planning on traveling to Chile, aren't you?
Not under the current circumstances, no. But I would like to try to collect data from some of the other eclipses that are happening worldwide in advance of the 2024 eclipse so that we have some things to look at to get ideas, in the same way that we used the Festival of Frequency Measurement as sort of a first pass at figuring out what we needed to know in order to do larger scale data collection, because we only get one shot at this.
And interestingly, there are several beacon stations in South America that may be suitable for monitoring.
And I wanted to add in the note of, so if you know anyone, sorry, was that Bill? Oh, okay. But if you know anyone who is interested in, happens to be near one of those beacon stations or is interested in eclipses across the world, put them in touch with us at Case Western. We'd be interested in working on that.
Bill, can you hear us now?
Perhaps he cannot.
Yeah, I think he's still having technical difficulties. We can
I see a
continue.
connecting to audio thing under his photo there.
Yeah. So why don't you just, you can keep with your Eclipse discussion. We still have a couple more minutes before the next presentation.
Sure, yeah. The only note on that is that we're currently exploring the idea of looking at using the same sorts of Doppler techniques that we've been using with WWV for other time standard stations around the world, of which there are many excellent ones. And I've been mapping out eclipses and looking at where time standard stations are relative to them and what data we might be able to collect that could be useful.
Okay, so I have a comment on that. We're collecting the raw signal so that we can do Doppler and any other sort of measurements we want to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
We're just not, what most people care about is just, was the signal weaker or stronger during the time? We want to actually analyze the signal. So that includes the Doppler stuff.
And I'll add to that in phase and quadrature measurements. That's what we supplied in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
Will the EclipseMob for 2024 be doing in-phase and quadrature?
Okay, so the actual A to D converter doesn't, but given a real-time stream, you can convert it to INQ, and that's what we'll be processing as INQ.
Are you going to be able to make any use of the 2023 annular eclipse?
We would like to. That's one of the reasons we're starting earlier.
Right.
But,
So that gives
also,
you,
you know, there's other eclipses around the world.
there are,
not
yes.
just in the U.S.
Right.
And so, you know, we actually are thinking about, okay, how about shipping some equipment over to another country
Mm-hmm.
and test there prior to the 2024 here?
Yeah. How much difference do you think there would be in the annular eclipse versus the total eclipse from an ionospheric standpoint?
Okay, so you know the path that you usually see of the eclipse across, the total eclipse across like the US?
Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, you have to realize that's the path of visual complete obstruction. That's
Right.
not the path of how the ionosphere is being treated.
Right.
Okay, and so when you look at some of the annular ones, actually you hit more of the ionosphere and it will come out very similar because it's higher up and you're at this other angle.
Mm-hmm.
You understand what I'm trying to say?
So you're saying they'd be rather similar from an ionospheric perspective.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the ionosphere path is actually, for each layer, it's a different amount south of the visual path.
Right. So really the 2023 annular eclipse is going to be a very good thing to have to be working toward as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that, Phil.